I'm sure you've heard the news. The wind carried a bitter heat as it moved through the broken shell of what used to be Chicago. Skyscrapers stood like charred bones against a copper-colored sky, their windows long shattered, their steel skeletons rusted from acid rains. Streets had become canals. The old river had burst its banks years ago, consuming highways and neighborhoods alike. A single drone skimmed low over the waterlogged ruins, its camera lenses blinking through the smog. Somewhere on the edge of this drowned city, inside a makeshift dome built from solar mesh and smart glass, Dr. Elias Carter stood before a blank screen. His reflection stared back, tired eyes, thinning hair, a face lined more by loss than age. The hum of machinery around him was constant, like the breath of some sleeping beast. The lab beneath him was alive with simulations, charts, and holograms, all modeling disaster in slow motion. Dr. Elias Carter, how long? Anika Torres, 23 minutes until launch. Dr. Elias Carter, let's go meet the end of the world. Outside, the launch platform rose like a spire over the wreckage. It was one of only 7 such towers left on the planet. Most had been destroyed in the uprisings, either by rogue militias or desperate civilians, who saw the Mars missions as an escape only for the elite. In many ways, they weren't wrong. But this mission was different, or so Carter told himself. As he and Anika approached the shuttle, the team was already assembling. There was Dembele, the engineer from Dakar with a mind like a machine and a temper to match. Talia Mendez, the linguist and symbologist Carter had recruited from a collapsing university in Buenos Aires. Raj Kumar, exobiologist, brilliant and quiet, who rarely spoke but noticed everything. 6 others followed, all hand-picked not just for their skill, but for their belief that Mars was more than an escape, it was a responsibility. Above them the sky shifted from orange to blood red as the sun dipped below the poisoned horizon. The shuttle groaned as it powered up. For a moment Carter looked back, one last glance at the world that had raised him, fed him, taught him everything he knew. It looked like a wound. They boarded in silence. No reporters, no politicians, just the low whine of engines and the countdown in his ear. At T-3 seconds, Carter closed his eyes, not in fear, but in grief. When the engines ignited, the Earth fell away. Mars was 7 months distant, 7 months of silence and stasis, suspended between the dying world behind and the unknown one ahead. During the journey there were no grand speeches, no celebratory toasts, just planning, building routines, reviewing data. The Jezero crater was their target, once home to an ancient Martian lake, now the future site of Earth's first off-world colony. They landed at dawn. The red sand stretched in every direction like powdered rust. Mountains rose in the distance, sharp and dry, casting long shadows across the crater floor. The air was thin, the cold absolute. But there was beauty in it. Something raw, untouched, sacred almost. They set to work immediately, inflating the habitat domes, assembling the solar fields, establishing communications. There was no time to marvel. The work was urgent, every task a matter of survival. Carter moved among them like a conductor, guiding without dominating, driven by the quiet conviction that Mars might yet teach humanity how to live again. But it was the 6th day when everything changed. Anika was the first to notice it. Anomalies in the subsurface scans, buried structures, symmetrical patterns beneath the crater floor, too perfect to be natural. At first, they assumed it was data corruption, but as the readings repeated themselves, doubt gave way to awe. Carter stared at the topography on the screen, heartbeat rising. The formations were massive, vaulted hollows stretching hundreds of meters wide. He had seen ancient cities buried under deserts. He had excavated temples beneath Himalayan glaciers. But this was older, deeper, impossible. They assembled a dig team. Carter insisted on leading it. They broke soil that night, and Mars, silent for eons, finally began to speak. The first breach of the outer shell revealed smooth black stone, polished and unmarred by time. The air pressure changed around them, though there was no wind. Carter felt it in his bones before he saw it, a kind of resonance as if the stone itself remembered. They unearthed a circular chamber, 50 meters in diameter, ringed by pillars inscribed with symbols none of them could recognize. Talia photographed them obsessively. Talia Mendez. It's not a language, it's a code. In the center stood a pedestal, upon it a tablet, not carved but grown, its surface iridescent and alive with shifting light. When Carter touched it, the room responded. Lights flickered into existence, not bulbs but glowing filaments in the walls. The chamber pulsed. Talia decoded the first phrase within hours. Talia Mendez, we were once like you. It stopped Carter cold. The tablet continued, line by line, telling the story of a people who had once thrived. They had reached the height of technology, defied their planet's limits, built great cities of metal and fire. But they ignored the warnings. Their planet changed, heated, dried. They fought wars over water, then over air. In the end, they turned inward, buried their knowledge, and perished. The final line struck Carter deepest: "Heed our fate, or you will share it." The discovery on Mars sent ripples through Earth, each wave crashing over the already fragile state of the planet. The revelation of an ancient advanced civilization lost to time had captivated the world's attention, but its true implications were far more dire. Dr. Carter had always known humanity stood on the brink of extinction, but this new piece of evidence twisted the knife. If Mars had suffered the same fate Earth was now enduring, then what hope did humanity have? What if the same mistakes were doomed to repeat themselves? In the days following the discovery, the Martian ruins became a focal point for the global media. But beneath the sensationalism, Carter and his team had no time to indulge in the world's questions. They had their own to answer. Back in the chamber, Carter stood in front of the tablet. The symbols danced before his eyes. He had read them, each word sinking deeper into his mind. The warning left by the Martians, "Heed our fate or you will share it," lingered like a shadow. It wasn't just a lesson, it was a prophecy, and there was no escaping it. Dr. Elias Carter, we need to get this message to Earth. Talia Mendez, you know they won't believe it, they'll dismiss it, they've been ignoring the signs for years. Dr. Elias Carter, but we have to try, we have to warn them before it's too late. Meanwhile, Annika had already begun preparing the communications relay. She had to get the data back to Earth, bypassing the usual channels. The governments of the world were more concerned with their own survival than listening to a warning from Mars. The collapse of Earth's political systems had already begun. Riots were breaking out in the streets, and militaries scrambled to protect what little remained of order. The team worked relentlessly, scanning the rest of the ruins and deciphering every piece of the Martian legacy they could find. The landscape, once desolate and mysterious, was now full of secrets waiting to be uncovered. As the days turned to weeks, the tension mounted. Back on Earth, the climate disasters only worsened. Wildfires raged out of control, consuming entire regions. Coastal cities were disappearing beneath the rising tides, and the air itself seemed to choke on pollution. Humanity had pushed the planet too far. Dr. Carter's words were prophetic. The Martians had been right. Ignoring the signs of environmental collapse had doomed them. But this time, humanity might still have a chance. The terraforming technology they had uncovered on Mars was a glimmer of hope. If the Martians could have saved their planet, then perhaps Earth could still be saved. But there was a catch. The process was long, complicated, and dangerous. It required a level of cooperation that Earth's governments had long since forgotten. When the message was finally sent, it wasn't just to the world's leaders. It went to everyone. The data reached every corner of Earth, every citizen, every rebel, every dissenter. For the first time in years, the world was united by a common cause, but the response was not as Carter had hoped. Rather than heeding the message, many governments attempted to suppress it. Some outright denied the evidence, claiming it was a hoax. Others sought to control the technology for their own gain, trying to monopolize the Martian discovery. Yet, despite their efforts, the message had already spread. Across the globe, underground movements began to form. Activists, scientists, and ordinary citizens banded together, rallying around Carter's discovery. They understood what was at stake. This was their last chance. In the midst of this, the Martian prophecy played out in real time. Earth's ecosystems began to unravel at an accelerating pace. Once bustling cities fell silent, their lights extinguished as power grids failed. Resources became even more scarce, and war loomed on the horizon. The desperate scramble for survival was becoming a bloody free-for-all. But just as the world seemed to collapse into chaos, there was a flicker of hope. The terraforming technology, buried deep beneath the Martian surface, began to hum with life. In the months following, a group of rogue scientists and engineers, those who had defied governments and corporations, came together to begin implementing the technology. They worked in secret, knowing the risks, but also understanding the gravity of their task. The world was running out of time. Meanwhile, Dr. Carter and his team continued to study the ruins, searching for anything that could help humanity reverse its course. But the Martian civilization was long gone, their cities reduced to dust, their technology either too advanced or too dangerous for human use. One fateful night, as Carter sat alone in the chamber, he was struck by a thought. What if the Martians hadn't simply left a warning but a solution? What if the terraforming technology they had developed wasn't just for restoring Mars, but for saving Earth as well? What if the answer had been there all along? The next morning, Carter and Annika pored over every piece of data again. They found a hidden component within the terraforming system, something the Martians had designed for their own survival. It was a failsafe, a mechanism to regulate the atmosphere, stabilize weather patterns, and restore balance to the planet's fragile ecosystem. It had never been activated, not in Mars's dying days, but it was there, waiting. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. They began work on adapting the technology, linking it to the global climate systems. The challenge was immense. The political barriers were high and the technology itself was still untested, but the time for hesitation was over. As Earth's final days seemed to close in, a fragile coalition of nations, led by the underground movements, finally took the leap. They activated the Martian technology. Slowly, but steadily, it began to work. Earth's atmosphere began to stabilize. It was the beginning of something new. Yet even as the first signs of recovery took hold, a harsh truth remained. The damage done was irreversible. The consequences of centuries of neglect and exploitation could never be fully undone. But it was a start, a small, fragile start. Back on Mars, Carter stood in the ruins of the ancient city. The Martian civilization had perished, but their warning had not been in vain. Humanity had listened, had acted, and though the battle was far from won, there was a glimmer of hope. We were once like you. Heed our fate, or you will share it. It was a lesson humanity would never forget. The Red Testament was not just a warning, it was a gift. And in that gift humanity had found its salvation, the end of the beginning. The weeks that followed were marked by a delicate calm. Earth, though not yet healed, had taken its first tentative steps toward recovery. The Martian technology that had once seemed like a distant dream was now Earth's most valuable asset. As the skies began to clear and the weather system slowly stabilized, the world's leaders, reluctant at first, had finally been forced to acknowledge the truth of Dr. Carter's findings. They knew that the Martians' fate wasn't just an ancient story, it was a stark warning for their own future. Still, the path to salvation wasn't without its struggles. The technology that had saved them came with an incredible cost. Resources were scarce, and the political landscape remained fractured, yet there was hope in the air. For the first time in decades, humanity seemed united in purpose. In the makeshift global summit held in the ruins of Paris, where leaders from across the world gathered, a fragile agreement was forged. The technology would be shared, but only under strict conditions. No one nation would control it. The planet's survival would depend on cooperation. Dr. Carter was called to speak at the summit, standing before world leaders who had once dismissed his warnings as the ramblings of an idealist. His voice, now weathered by months of constant strain, carried the weight of their collective future. Dr. Elias Carter, we've been given a second chance, but this is not a gift. It is a burden. We must work together, not as nations, but as a single species. If we do not, if we allow the same divisions that tore our world apart to control this gift, then we will have failed, not just the people of Earth but the Martians too. As the days passed, the process of restoring Earth's environment continued. Slowly the skies cleared, the oceans began to recede, and the winds, once heavy with the stench of pollution, carried with them a faint, new freshness. But there were still dark clouds on the horizon. The global economy remained in chaos, the social fabric strained to its breaking point. The world had been irrevocably changed. Meanwhile, on Mars, Carter's team continued to study the Martian ruins. They had uncovered more than they had imagined, though many of the artifacts and technologies were too advanced or too dangerous for immediate use. It became clear that the Martians had been a deeply conflicted civilization, one whose brilliance had been both their salvation and their undoing. In the heart of the ruined city, Carter discovered a final chamber, hidden beneath the sand, deeper than the others. This one, however, was unlike the rest. It was not filled with artifacts or symbols, but with something far more troubling, a warning, etched directly into the walls. We thought we were alone, but we were wrong. There are others out there. The message was cryptic, but Carter's gut told him this was no mere coincidence. The Martians hadn't just warned of environmental collapse, they had also foreseen something beyond, an impending threat, something that had been their undoing and might very well be Earth's as well. A chill ran through Carter's spine as he processed the words. Was it possible? Had the Martians been aware of a greater danger, one that they had been unable to stop, and if so, Was it already on its way to Earth? He gathered his team and relayed his findings. The cryptic message had only deepened the mystery. The Martians had been a civilization of incredible scientific prowess, yet they had been driven to extinction. And their final message, a warning of others out there, suggested that Earth's survival wasn't guaranteed. As Carter worked with his team to decipher the remaining texts, he became more convinced that the Martians' demise was tied to an outside force. They had fought wars against themselves, but there had been something beyond their planet, something that had finished them off. And if humanity was to survive, they would need to prepare for that possibility. The race to uncover the Martian secrets was on. The terraforming technology had been activated, but the unknown threat hinted at by the Martians loomed larger. Was the collapse of Mars part of something much more dangerous than just environmental decay? What if the Martians had been victims of a much greater cosmic force? Back on Earth, as Carter's warning began to seep into the global consciousness, leaders began to prepare for what could be the next great test for humanity. Earth was healing, yes, but the scars of its previous destruction still ran deep. The focus shifted from merely rebuilding the planet to preparing for whatever the Martians had foreseen. The rebuilding of Earth and Mars went hand in hand. As Earth's recovery began to show visible results, the construction of a permanent human presence on Mars accelerated. Carter had made his peace with the fact that Mars was not a refuge, it was a responsibility. Earth would have to learn from its history, or it would fall again, just as Mars had. At the same time, the world had begun to act on Carter's call for unity. Across nations and borders, a new kind of coalition began to form, one driven not by political alliances or national pride, but by the collective will to survive. The Martian prophecy had united them, and the terraforming technology they had uncovered had become a symbol of what humanity could achieve when it worked together. In the quiet moments between missions, as Carter stood at the edge of the Martian city, he thought about the last message left by the Martians. They had warned of others, beings or forces that could not be understood by even the greatest minds of their time. As the dust settled on the red sands, Carter couldn't help but wonder, were the Martians merely the first to fall, or had they been the first to survive what was coming? He turned his gaze back to Earth. Humanity was given a second chance, and he could only hope they were ready. Because in the vast, unknown universe, Earth might not be the only one who had ignored the signs.